Coronavirus has had an adverse effect on the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement, but says work has resumed to establish the Continental Accord. The president further said that work is being done to silence the guns and stabilise countries in conflict on the continent. He was briefing the country after the party's NEC meeting that was held over the weekend.
The NEC further acknowledged the impact of COVID-19 on the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and appreciated the resumption of work to take the process of a common African market forward. It welcomed the fact that the Office of the Africa Free Trade Area has now been opened in Ghana, headed by one of our own as Director General. It also notes work being done to continue to silence the guns in Mali and Libya and ensure stability in Mozambique, Sudan, and Zimbabwe. The NEC welcomed government efforts to engage the situation in Zimbabwe, in particular, the deployment of special envoys. It emphasized the importance of the envoys engaging with all stakeholders in the country to assist in addressing the current situation. ANC and government processes must complement each other. The NEC supported greater party-to-party interaction between the ANC and ZANU-PF with the intention to develop a fuller understanding of the situation in Zimbabwe and to determine how the ANC and government can play a supportive role. It was also agreed that the ANC must speak to all parties and all stakeholders as well. Concern in the discussions was expressed at the insurgency in Mozambique. Government was urged to effectively address any security threats to this country and to provide support to the government of Mozambique should this be requested. But also importantly, that we should continue to act within the parameters and framework that have been set out by SADC. The NEC agreed that the International Relations Committee of the ANC must provide detailed reports on these two matters at its next meeting. The NEC supports the ongoing alliance campaign of solidarity with the people of Palestine in this very difficult and trying time that they are going through.
For more on this, we're now joined via Skype by Professor Somadoda Fikeni, who's a policy and political analyst from Unisa. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. The President had to deal with quite a lot of issues, both domestically and comment on issues beyond our borders. Let's start with the international story. And a lot of noise has been made on social media in particular about Zimbabwe. Do you think that the President and the ANC through the President is doing enough, is saying enough to manage the situation next door?
They certainly are not doing as they are supposed to do in terms of putting pressure and have some conscious, concerted effort on the matter. Perhaps that is also caused by the fact that they belong to this solidarity forum of the former liberation organizations, in which case they may want to support each other or they may want to be cautious in trying to resolve each other's challenges instead of putting and applying pressure. So we might find a similar situation as was the case with quiet diplomacy.
Can something happen party to party, or does this need to happen at a much bigger level, perhaps at state level, or even wearing his African Union hat?
Well, I do think that I would rather trust the state-to-state approach. And where South Africa might think it could also have awkwardness, they may use the SADC infrastructure to approach the matter as they've done in Lesotho, as they've done elsewhere in the DRC before. Because in this particular case, party-to-party arrangement, in a solidarity arrangement, they may begin to reinforce each other's position, and it may not even have the credibility where they may want to talk to the opposition parties.
All right, the last thing on Zimbabwe, to fix something, you've got to acknowledge that there's a problem. Zimbabwe says there's no crisis. And the language that's being used by President Ramaphosa is talking about the situation. But no one wants to call it what it is. And is that going to help or hinder?
Well, I do think that they are just being diplomatic about it, but the reality is that Zimbabwe is in a crisis, and a deepening crisis for that matter. And this crisis is not just an economic crisis, it's a political crisis. And now it may make it even more difficult to deal with the issue of the lifting of sanctions, because other countries, particularly in the West, will cite the issue of human rights violation as a reason to continue with the sanctions.
All right, let's talk about Mozambique now. South Africa was threatened by the militants that if we got involved, then we would become fair game for attacks. Is this something, again, the party should be thinking about? Or is this a state issue? And I suppose the party can instruct, share thoughts. How do they go about dealing with Mozambique?
Well, I do think that, again, in the Mozambican situation, it calls for SADC and AU intervention, and even beyond, if they happen not to have the resources, as has been the case with the UN being approached in Sudan and in the DRC and so forth. So to that extent, South Africa would actually neutralize the notion of being singled out by the rebels in northern Mozambique if they were to use a multilateral approach rather than an individual country approach.
The Continental Free Trade Agreement, again, was mentioned by the President, and it seems as if it has been put on a pause button of sorts because of COVID-19. And this is something that we certainly as a continent need to make sure happens and happens as quickly as possible.
Certainly, COVID-19 has put some spikes on the road of the free trade agreement. However, given the fact that in the post-COVID-19 period, we are likely going to see economic nationalism where bigger nations retreat into focusing on their internal affairs and even try to limit trade. This is the best opportunity for Africa to use this crisis period to strengthen its own intra-continental trade. And that free trade agreement does provide a framework for that.
And that free trade agreement is going to mean movement of goods across the continent, but also on discussion is a movement of people. And in recent weeks, the President has had to field quite a number of questions about migrants, immigration into South Africa. And I wonder, is this something that the ruling party really should have on its agenda, because it is becoming a hot talking point?
Any country that ignores the issue of refugee crisis, of economic migrants, anywhere in the world would actually be foolish in a way, precisely because Brexit and the advent of Donald Trump in the US and many other countries, those were a response to the perceived or real influx. In the African continent, there is already instances, even during this COVID period, where other countries such as Botswana, Kenya, Nigeria were strengthening their own immigration laws and also trying to protect jobs, instead of allowing for individual unilateral approach to this matter, it should also be something that countries do discuss and have common protocols around that. In as far as the movement of people and goods, that one ought to be something that ought to have been implemented long time ago, and even issuance of visa on arrival, rather than the complicated administrative processes, which are also expensive. And that, in a way, may also, at another level, help in terms of the mobility of high-skilled labor, and also internal continental tourism could be promoted through that avenue.
All right, okay, so that's the international outlook. Let's come back home now. And again, lots of fires that the president had to put out. It seems as if there was a unified message that came out. We saw the top six present their post-NEC statement for the first time in a long, long time. What did that tell us?
Well, ANC, as I indicated earlier in the week when people were saying what's going to happen, I said of all parties, ANC has become a seasoned political actor in terms of how it comes up and present a unified face, even in face of deep factionalism, in face of contradictions. And even the statement they actually coin is the kind that strikes a balance where each one of the contending parties would say, we seem to have achieved some of our goals. And they demonstrated just that. And also coming together, answering questions without contradicting each other in any fundamental way was also very important, especially in front of the media, because there were many hanging questions and there were many issues that were unanswered. And when they do not expose themselves into answering those questions, speculation and some of the stories that make headline may actually run ahead of what is happening on the ground.
Do you think that he's managed to, I'm not sure what word to use, to manage, I guess, the party poopers in the likes of former President Jacob Zuma and others who wrote letters? There was the one-man march outside St. George's Hotel at the weekend. Are they now starting to be seen as lone voices, or do they have a constituency that within the ANC that they continue to represent?
They may have a constituency within the ANC, but that constituency has become much more vulnerable and also unstable in a way. Remember that after Nazareth, you have seen a number of shifts. For example, KZN used to be firmly behind the former President Jacob Zuma. That of late you realize that they have drifted somewhat away. Hence, they were able to even call his political nemesis, the former President Thabo Mbeki, on several occasions to come and address the political school, to come and address different forums, to come and address even the Mugabe memorial lecture. So all those does indicate that in politics, there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies, but there are permanent interests. Hence, even nationally, you're beginning to see what I would say he has somewhat outmaneuvered them when they had quite a coordinated attack at this stage. And from this point onwards, what you might begin to see, some of them might feel the heat of the legal processes in the aftermath of the State Capture Commission investigation. And he might also be in a better position to say, even the PPE COVID-19 scandal, some of the people who were perceived to be closer to the president will be, feeling the brunt of the law. So when he begins to step back and allow the legal processes to take place, he will be in a position to say it is not a factional battle, but rather the one dealing with the corruption issues.
Well, they came up with a comprehensive plan as to how to deal with the corruption issues. But in all of these things and throughout time, it's more about what actually gets done compared to what is planned. And I suppose until those convictions come, people might still say, we've heard this before.
Without any doubt, ANC leadership at this stage suffers from credibility crisis. Anything they promise or say, any resolutions they take, no longer carry any weight until and unless some action is done. Because we've seen these statements and platitudes before, and it looks like it was merely a PR exercise. That's why a good statement being presented is one thing people will regard with some degree of caution, and some may even be cautiously optimistic. But the real thing will be when they start acting internally within the party and when they give space to the law enforcement agencies to do their part.
A lot of weight has been put recently on the Integrity Commission of the ANC. In previous years, it has been found wanting. If one considers some of the things that have gone on, but the party has either been unable to deal with those. Do you think that this is a new era for the Commission? Again, it also has to prove its mettle, doesn't it?
Certainly, it has been boosted a lot by the crisis at the very top, where now you see even the topmost leaders coming and being summoned by this integrity committee. But there are two things that tend to weaken its position. The first one is a deep structural one. If you are to have findings and then you go back to the NEC of the ANC to give effect to such findings, you may run into trouble because some of the people who are being fingered sit in the very same NEC. And the second one is the resourcing of this committee. It's a far cry because it doesn't have what it takes to come up and investigate and be able to test evidence. Therefore, they rely on the media reports or they rely on self-presentation by individuals, which is not a very tight situation when you want to impose a penalty or a sanction on a person.
All right. Professor Somadoda Fikeni, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed, as always, for your insightful views on current affairs issues that face us in the country. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that's Professor Somadoda Fikeni speaking to us about the ANC NEC that took place this weekend and the aftermath. And suggestions are that it looks as if the party looks very united. They've come out with a united voice, and we wait to see what happens in the next chapter of this unfolding story.